All right, joining us right now to talk more about Israel and Iran, specifically the impact for China and the energy markets, is Shahzad Qazi, the COO of the China Beige book. And Shahzad, this is a little different than what we usually bring you on to talk about. Geopolitics obviously flaring up in a big way. You're here to tell us what that means for China, the other big superpower in the world.
Yeah, well, I think the key thing for China is, first of all, they've already come out and said that they are opposed to the Israeli attack on Iran. I think they are behind the scenes probably very interested in pushing the Trump administration to work out some kind of de-escalation. For them, this is largely, from an economic standpoint, about oil. It's about access to oil. They buy the Iranian oil. And they buy the Iranian oil. They're one of the biggest, if not sometimes the biggest, buyer of Iranian oil. Obviously, it's done through the black market and it's illegal, but that makes a huge difference for them.
Do they care about whether Iran would be a nuclear-armed country? How would that factor in? And why does the economic output matter so much more?
My sense is that the countries in the region, Iran is neighbors with 4 nuclear powers: Russia, China, India, and Pakistan. And none of those, I think, want Iran to have a nuclear weapon. Yet I don't think anybody in the region wants to see another country completely destabilize, have a power vacuum, have what will absolutely be, if there's a regime overthrow, where the next stop is going to be a very bloody and very intense civil war. It's not going to be some kind of Goldilocks scenario where you just have a new government take over and Iran becomes stable. And that is a scenario everybody wants to avoid in the region.
But do you think the other neighbors in the region, the ones who don't have nuclear powers, want to see Iran armed with nuclear weapons? I mean, you just mentioned the ones who have nuclear weapons don't want them to have it. What about the ones who don't?
Probably not. I don't know if anybody wants Iran to have a nuclear weapon. And I think it's...
More nukes seems like a bad idea just in general.
Totally. And I think, the real question is, do the Iranians ultimately want to have a nuclear weapon? I think the answer may have changed now. They might be much closer to a yes now than they were 5 days ago, 6 days ago.
We just heard that we've had almost 5 decades of troublemaking from Iran. We saw in Syria a regime was toppled. It doesn't seem like all hell is, I don't know how it finally plays out, and it's not necessarily great. I don't know what this regime eventually looks like either, but it doesn't sound like what you just described would automatically happen in Iran. You don't think that there's no Arab Spring, or I don't know, what would you call it in Iran? What would it be called? I think if the people really do strive, crave something that looks like what other countries in the Middle East that are more moderate, what those people have at this point.
After having covered what happened in Afghanistan, having covered the region widely in a previous life, I always say that there's a difference between people with aspirations and people with the guns. People with aspiration are great, but it's people with the guns who have a more everlasting impact.
That doesn't last forever. It looks like this is like one of the... In 5 decades, it's never been possible. This doesn't it look like it... I don't know whether you heard Fred Kemp earlier. He thinks this could usher in... He's very optimistic about it. You sound very negative and pessimistic about it.
Yeah, I certainly don't share that view. I'm quite frankly very afraid, and I can tell you that a lot of people in the administration, especially those who are focused on China right now, certainly don't want any part of this. This is taking our eye off the ball for sure, and this is going to massively distract resources, because if you're talking about a multi-year effort, I mean, Assad's civil war went on for, almost 13, 14 years, if not more. It took a long time. Iraq was a mess. Afghanistan, 20 years of occupation, only for the Taliban to come right back into power. We saw in the middle the growth of ISIS. Syria is, of course, ruled by somebody today who himself was previously in Al-Qaeda, which on 9/11 we would have considered to be completely unacceptable to us.
He's rejected all of this, hasn't he? Yeah.
Sure. Okay.
I know.
So, it's a very dangerous scenario. And I think, 6 months ago, the president obviously had very different aspirations, remaking America's global trade relationships, ushering in an unprecedented era of peace in the area. And we're getting farther away from it. But more importantly, I think competition with China is what's key.
So what would China do to try and preserve its economic interest, its oil that it's getting from Iran? What would it be willing to lay on the table to do to push towards that effort?
Look, at this point, it's very hard to say that they would provide any kind of defense support to the Iranians, somehow try to bolster their air defenses and such. But it becomes a very complicated scenario where if, say, the Iranians say we're going to shut down the Strait of Hormuz, that will instantly drag us in at that point. That puts China in a very difficult situation because shutting down the Strait of Hormuz is bad for them as well. So I don't think the decisions are clear as yet. China is in a tough spot, which is why I think their hope is that this doesn't escalate to that level at all.
Is there a chance that they wind up on the same side with the U.S. and maybe are more likely to give on some economic pushes as a result of it?
I think if push comes to shove, it's far better for Xi to sit back and let the U.S. do the hard work. And then also, keep in mind, gives them a very nice talking point that says the U.S. constantly makes us look like we're destabilizing the region, we're destabilizing the world, we're a bully, we're the pacifists here. Gives them a very good talking point without having to lift a finger.
The pacifists who want to see the oil continue, and so we don't care who's in power or what kind of nuclear weapons they have access.
They'll come back and tell especially the quote-unquote global South, look, we're not in the business of regime overthrow.